Good morning, my name's Karen Stoltz. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at Mica, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Falvey Hall this morning for our lecture on art as a tool for community change. I want to thank Rebecca Yenawine for having the vision to invite Mark Stern to come and speak with us here, and then thank her also for collaborating with us in the Office of Community Engagement to create a larger panel that enables us to look at a few different frameworks for art as a tool for engagement and for change. So thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to all of our panelists for being here. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen this morning, and then I'm going to turn over the floor to our speakers. So our featured presenter is Mark Stern, and he's going to talk to us about the research that he and Susan Seifert have been doing in Philadelphia, looking at the ways in which art and culture influence urban communities and contribute to community development. And that's our featured presentation for the morning, and then we're also going to get a chance to hear from some work that's happening within our own community here at Mica. Namely, Jeffry Cudlin and Gerald Ross are going to talk to us about the work that our Master of Fine Arts and Curatorial Practice program is doing in Station North. I'm seeing hands for the Curatorial Practice program, creating inclusive and community-centered exhibitions and art engagement in the Station North neighborhood, so a very place-based strategy. We're going to hear from Rebecca Yenawine, who is in our graduate program in community arts, on the work that she's doing, the research that she's doing, looking at the impact of community arts on individual participants. And then finally, we're going to hear also from Kalima Young, who works with me in the Office of Community Engagement on the Baltimore Art Justice Project, which is a newly launched initiative which is helping us to identify and connect artists, arts organizations, and advocates to better support strategies, arts-based strategies for change in the city of Baltimore. So each of these presenters have a wealth of experience and a diversity of backgrounds, and as mentioned, their full bios are in the programs that we handed out, because it would have taken me 15 minutes to just read the bios to you. So I hope you will get to know more about them and some of their work through both their talks today and through the programs that you have. And I also want to, before we begin, just thank Cindy Barth. I don't think she's physically here with us, but she helped make this presentation possible through support from the Mixed Media Lecture Series, which is a really valuable resource here at Mica. So we thank her for that as well. So, just to give you a sense of the flow for the morning, we're going to begin with a 30-minute presentation from Mark, and then we're going to move directly into 10-minute presentations from each of the Mica panelists, and then we're going to have, I hope, a good 10 to 15 minutes for some Q&A and dialogue, because I know there's a lot of folks here in the room that are doing very interesting, valuable work as well, and we want to hear from you. So, before I begin with Mark's introduction, I just want to give a round of applause for all of you for being here and for all of our panelists for being here today. And now it is my honor to introduce Mark, and I'm going to have to read this to you. Mark Stern is the Kenneth L. M. Prey Professor of Social Welfare and co-director of the Urban Studies program at the University of Pennsylvania. He holds a BA from Reed College, an M.A. from the University of Toronto, and a Ph.D. in history from York University, Canada. He has authored or co-authored 5 books, including One Nation Divisible, What America Was, and What It Is Becoming. Since 1994, Stern has been principal investigator for the Social Impact of the Arts Project, a research program of Penn School of Social Policy and Practice. The project is focused on developing methods for measuring the ways that the arts and cultural engagement influence urban communities, and applying those methods to studies of metropolitan Philadelphia. A quick plug as well, and I think I just saw Ben Stone walk in the room. Mark is also, because he loves Baltimore already so much, he is going to be the featured keynote speaker on Wednesday afternoon here in Baltimore at the National Symposium for Arts, Cultural, and Entertainment Districts. And I encourage you to go to that talk as well, and that is a 2-day symposium which is starting at the Baltimore Hilton and then continuing all day Wednesday here in Falvey Hall. So if you're interested in that, please go to the Station North Arts and Entertainment District website for more info. And for the students in the crowd, it's only $10 to register for 2 days, so check it out. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mark Stern.
Good morning, everybody. You probably noticed that I get 30 minutes and everyone else gets 10 minutes, so I hope that's not just because they assume that a Penn professor must be long-winded. But I'll try to make good use of my time. Essentially, I want to do 4 things today. I want to talk a little bit about ways that the arts engage communities, kind of theories of civic engagement in the arts. I want to give a little background about how the social impact of the Arts Project does its research. Then I want to present some of the findings from our work, both predominantly in Philadelphia, although I have some that we've been doing in Baltimore recently. And then I want to end with some more recent work we've been working on the making more explicit the connection between the arts and social justice. So that's my goal for today. So I can go through this, but essentially my colleague Susan Seifert and I have been doing this work since 1994, indicating that we're extremely persistent and slow. But essentially, we got into doing this work because we saw some real problems in the kind of conventional way arts research was being conceptualized. On the one hand, we saw this overwhelming emphasis on the economic impact of the arts that we felt excluded a huge amount of the work that people in the arts do from the discussion of how the arts can impact society. Secondly, primarily because there was such an emphasis on kind of consultant research, that there was this huge emphasis on the organizational structure of arts organizations, and much less emphasis on how those organizations interact with their communities. As a result of that, our emphasis has always been on how arts fit into a variety of different kinds of social networks, and how those networks radiate out from artistic practice and policy to influence the broader community. So our approach has been that if the arts have an impact, you should be able to measure that impact. That impact, a lot of that impact happens between people's ears. It happens in terms of individuals, but that there's a broader social impact, and that if you're going to measure that, you're going to have to use measures that uses their unit of analysis, not just individuals, but the kind of social networks that individuals and organizations and other entities create. Methodologically, we decided very early on then to use geographic information systems as a way of pulling together that data at the ecological level rather than looking at individuals. And then we supplement this kind of emphasis on quantitative geographic data by doing a lot of interviewing in the neighborhoods and communities we work in to give us an understanding of how people make sense of what we see in our data. Let me talk a little bit then about theories for conceptualizing this connection between the arts and civic engagement. We essentially think of this as kind of having 3 basic ways of thinking about this. One, what we call didactic, a second that we call discursive, and a third that we call ecological. By didactic, I'm essentially referring to theories of the arts' impact on society and communities that focuses on the arts kind of putting out a message that they're trying to convince the community of. We see this a lot. There's a long history of that going back centuries, but certainly over the past century, we've seen efforts to use the arts, say, to Americanize immigrants during the early 20th century. Certainly the arts have been very active in a variety of new social movements, including the Occupy movements we saw over the past year. Now, I will say that this didactic approach to some extent has gotten a bad name in certain situations because it's very hard to separate it from kind of the propagandistic use of the arts to kind of put out a big lie that you convince the whole society. So there's a tension around this didactic vision around that issue. I'm going to go with that. The second set of theories that we look at are what are called discursive theories. That is essentially using the arts to promote discussions and interactions between different groups in society. These photos I put up here are from one of the groups we work with in Philadelphia, Asian Arts Initiative, that used a set of public arts installations as a way of provoking discussion in the neighborhood about what Chinatown's role in Philadelphia is and what its future looked like. I particularly liked, up in the upper left-hand corner, you see that kind of reddish-orange blob. An artist from Boston came in and he discovered that one of the standard colors that you can get, like in house painting, is called Chinatown red. So he essentially got a parking lot in Chinatown and painted the whole thing Chinatown red as a way of saying this is like the external image of what Chinatown is, and to what extent does that square with what we as members of the Chinatown community think about it. So, you know, we've seen this effort, and I'm going to talk a little more later about work we've done working with a group of artists who were working explicitly on using the arts to engage immigrant communities in Philadelphia as an example of this discursive approach. The third approach we identified, we call the ecological approach. And essentially, this is an approach that doesn't have much to do with the intention of the artist. And this is sometimes a hard point to make. The issue here is that having arts in a community has this catalytic impact on communities. I think that's one of the findings we've established through this work we've been doing over the past 15 years. And that very often doesn't have much to do with what the intention of the artists are. That is, artists can be in their studios worrying about their work and paying the rent, and that the aggregate effect of people doing that has a ripple effect out on the community. So this ecological approach is interesting in two ways. First of all, because it doesn't have anything to do with intention, and secondly, because in our view, it probably is a more common and pervasive way that the arts has an influence on communities. So we think it's worth paying attention to. And this was just an example of an ecological approach where an arts organization moves into a neighborhood. It doesn't kind of have an agenda in terms of changing the community, but as different arts assets aggregate in that community, in total they start having an impact, and I'll talk about some of our findings in that respect. So this ecological approach is interesting because of this issue of intentionality or lack thereof. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about some of our core findings through this work. Essentially what we do is we aggregate large databases about a variety of different kinds of arts assets. And then what we found is that when those different kinds of resources are concentrated in particular neighborhoods, we see very strong connections between that and a variety of different outcomes. Where those neighborhoods tend to aggregate, well, we're coming to some conclusions about where that is, that they tend not to be downtown, although very often there certainly is a geographic dimension. They tend to be closer to downtown. They have a lot of rental properties, which I mean, it took us 15 years till we came to this, but then we realized, of course, if you need rental properties if you want people to move in. So it wasn't like it shouldn't have been like this big aha moment, but it just emerged recently. And then finally, and one thing that we've actually been very strong on is that there's this connection between the arts and various dimensions of social diversity. So, right. Right, so let me talk a little bit just about the kind of indicators we track over time. One of them, sort of obviously, is nonprofit arts organizations. This, on the one hand, is straightforward because, after all, there's kind of a list of nonprofit arts organizations, so that seems straightforward. However, what we found is that that list only gets us so far. That, in fact, at any time you go into a community and there are official nonprofits in the community, there are kind of proto-nonprofits that are in the in the process of becoming more established. And then there's a whole variety of kind of embedded and non-arts groups that are actually doing arts within the community. So this is a short way of saying that this actually is a real pain in terms of a database to gather. For example, just in Baltimore, we've got a couple of graduate students from Penn who are going through weeklies and a variety of different lists, trying to identify spaces that artists use, groups that don't show up on any of our lists. And this just gives a preliminary list of what we've come up with Baltimore so far. So you can see you start with a bunch of dots, and then you aggregate those dots to get a feel for what neighborhoods have heavy concentrations of arts organizations and which don't. A second and even more challenging database for us to gather is around resident artists. Where do artists live in a neighborhood? Some cities are easier to do this in. For example, I'm using this as an example because Seattle was easy in the sense that both the city and some nonprofits compiled large lists of artists essentially around fellowship programs. And we were able to use that to get a feel. And again, you get this sense of where is it in a city that artists are finding themselves congregating. A third type of list that we use in our work is essentially around cultural participants. In this case, we've only actually been able to do this in Philadelphia so far, but we've ended up with lists of something on the order of 600,000 households and that were involved one way or another in the arts. And that again gives us another layer for thinking about where cultural engagement happens in a region. Okay, so we put those lists together. The one I didn't put up here, we also include lists on commercial cultural firms. We put those together to create an overall index of cultural assets. In a sense, what would, if you put all those indexes together, where are those concentrations occurring? So we do that, and that's sort of a straightforward exercise, and I have that pictured on the left. Then we do something different, which is we say, okay, I mentioned that there are certain conditions that make it easier for these aggregations to emerge. So what we find is, what if we look at neighborhoods that in a sense are overachieving in spite of the fact that they maybe are not located in the right neighborhood, or their incomes are lower than those of the average neighborhood that has a large concentration of cultural assets. So we end up with what we call this corrected cultural asset index, which essentially identifies a couple of kinds of neighborhoods. One are just kind of the center of cultural life in a metropolitan area. But another one, more importantly, are neighborhoods that are often missed or left out when we think about cultural assets, but that, in fact, in spite of a series of obstacles that they face around poverty, income, distance from the center of the city, are overachieving in terms of cultural assets. Right. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about some of the features, some of our findings in terms of the nature of cultural assets, of how these cultural assets aggregate and the kinds of ripple effects they have on neighborhoods. First of all, as I mentioned, we find this very persistent connection between the arts and a variety of different forms of diversity. One of our earliest findings, and one that I still have a soft spot for, is what we called POV-PROF neighborhoods. This was one of these things which as a researcher you just trip over. We were doing, we were running through, mindlessly, we were running through correlations between arts assets and different features, and we said, well, it turns out the arts are concentrated in neighborhoods with higher than average poverty, and they're concentrated in neighborhoods with lots of professionals and managers. And it didn't record. And what we realized was that as we looked around the city, there were these economically diverse neighborhoods with higher than average poverty, higher than average number of professionals. And as you can see, across all three cities, these neighborhoods persistently have higher concentrations of cultural assets than other neighborhoods. One guy who once picked up on our POV-PROF idea said that in technical terms, these could be called funky neighborhoods, which I appreciate. approve of. Another kind of diversity we found is what we called household diversity. Essentially, people living in non-family households, or at least what the Census Bureau defines as non-family households. We can get into a fight about that. Essentially neighborhoods with people living as roommates, unmarried couples of either gender, people living on their own, and also heavy concentrations of younger adults, people between, say, the ages of 20 and 34. You put those together, and again, you see a very strong relationship between those kinds of neighborhoods and where these cultural assets aggregate. Finally, and I will say in a way that's becoming more troubling to me over time, we found a connection between the arts and ethnic diversity. First of all, as we look more closely at our participant data, we realize that arts participants come from all over the city, even if the group itself is very committed to working in a particular neighborhood. So for example, this map here is of participants in a Latino cultural organization located in North Philly that's very committed to its neighborhood. But you look at where its participants are coming from, and 80% of them are coming from outside the neighborhood in which that group is located. Now, the interesting thing here is that very often groups, when they're talking to their funders, are nervous about this. Because it sounds like, oh, well, you don't actually represent that neighborhood, you're working with the city. But we've been trying to make this argument that this is actually a strength, that in contrast to other kinds of community-based organizations, arts organizations work to bridge these barriers around social class and around ethnicity very effectively, and that in a sense it's their unique niche in terms of community, the kinds of organizations that communities have. And over time, what we've discovered is that neighborhoods that are ethnically diverse, that have large number of cultural resources, are much more likely to stay diverse over time. You know, historically, we've thought of ethnically diverse neighborhoods as essentially an inherently unstable phenomenon where you know, a neighborhood is diverse from the time the first African Americans move in till the last whites move out, or vice versa. What we've discovered is that when cultural resources are heavily concentrated in a neighborhood, that that diversity tends to be stable. It tends not to be a transitory experience. So let me talk about some of the outcomes we've associated with the art, with the concentration of cultural resources. We were able to get data from a very complex study that was tracking the well-being of young people in Philadelphia, and they were able to develop what they called this index of social stress, and you can see the different factors involved here. It's essentially a set of behavioral problems that neighborhoods have. What we discovered was that when you control for income, that neighborhoods with large concentrations of cultural assets had much lower scores on this social stress income index. That is, in essence, looking, overall, there's a very strong correlation between this and income. If you correct for that the arts makes a big difference in terms of neighborhoods around this, low weight births and this whole variety of other elements that go into this index. Another interesting type of data we've been able to get that we found very strong relationships to the arts with is on incidents of ethnic and racial harassment in the city. This data is kind of hard for us to get. We have to negotiate with city agencies that track this over time. But it turns out that incidents of ethnic and racial harassment are much more likely to happen in neighborhoods that are experiencing a transition in terms of their ethnic identity. That's kind of a no-brainer. But if you look at those neighborhoods that are essentially going through ethnic transition, what you find is that the ones that have concentrations of arts and cultural organizations in them have much lower rates. In fact, their rate is lower than the citywide average. So again, we find this very strong, persistent relationship, and we're hoping to get this data is from the early 2000s, and one of our goals over the next years is to update that data for Philadelphia. More recently, what we've been doing some analysis of more recent census data, and here one of the things we've discovered is that neighborhoods that have high concentrations of cultural assets were much more likely to experience declines in their poverty rate than other neighborhoods, and you can see that's pretty much the case across the 3 cities we study here: Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Seattle. Okay, so my last point, which I hope I have time for. Am I doing good? Good. Maybe I'm talking too fast. Our project was always motivated by the notion that kind of a vision that the arts could play a role, a socially inclusive role in society. And part of it is identifying whether that's actually happening, and part of it is kind of aspiring to make that happen. I would say over the past couple of years, we've been focused more on being more explicit about what those connections look like, partially because we're kind of worried that there are many, many trends in terms of social policy generally, and in terms of policy around culture in particular, that are pushing in the opposite direction. So, as I said, we've been more explicit about this, and essentially we've been, I want to talk about 2 things we've been working on. First of all, a study of the role of arts in immigrant communities that we were able to do a couple of years ago. And then finally, an effort to kind of construct a map of kind of social justice and social inclusion for the entire city of Philadelphia, using this multidimensional approach that a number of European scholars have been promoting. So let me talk about those briefly. As I mentioned, part of the reason we've gotten into this is because there's this debate in the arts world between kind of art's intrinsic value and the instrumental use of the arts. We feel that one way to kind of get beyond that debate is to simply say that it's not that social well-being is over here and the arts are over here, that a good society, people should have opportunities and access to the arts. So that, in a sense, keeping them separate doesn't make any sense. So the idea was to develop kind of a multidimensional approach to social welfare that incorporated arts engagement as a key element of that. And as you see, we feel that this builds on work that's been done, a lot of it in Europe, on notions of social inclusion and the kind of more complex notion of social well-being. We feel it also feeds into some national policy trends, particularly the fact that the NEA is currently interested in linking the arts to this notion of livability. I mean, we've been working with that, but although we think livability is a little shallow, we need a slightly more complex notion than that. So let me talk a little bit about arts, this immigrant project we did. Philadelphia has experienced a rapid increase in its immigrant population, and one thing that struck us was that although immigrants are a growing presence in the city, that if you went to kind of the official cultural if you kind of embedded yourself in the official cultural scene, that wasn't showing up much. So the pilot study we wanted to do was to look, essentially using that discursive model, at arts that use cultural practices as a means of social inclusion, as a way of furthering social inclusion. As I said, the reason we got into this was, we found, if we looked at the immigrant communities, that they in fact had very rich cultural lives. This, I don't know if anyone can read it, but it shows that immigrants actually were very active in a variety of cultural organizations, cultural practices, although by and large not in official kind of mainstream nonprofit cultural resources. So they were engaged but disconnected from kind of mainstream cultural concerns. At the same time, what we found was that established nonprofits, although they expressed interest in engaging artists, they couldn't demonstrate any actions they were actually taking to pull artists into their work. That they weren't running special programs, they weren't doing outreach to immigrant communities. So we thought, given this, that it was important to focus on what was going on within immigrant community that would address this issue of social inclusion. And it was an exploratory study. We essentially came up with what we came across as 5 kind of models of social practice, and you can see them here. Creating safe spaces for immigrants to engage in cultural practices, using the arts as a means of community organizing, developing links between arts organizations and non-arts serving the immigrant community, school-based programs, which, given that the Philadelphia school system is more or less imploding, are a real challenge. And then finally, actually a less frequent model was around what people called culturally sensitive social services. And you're not going to be able to read this, but essentially it was those 4 models, and we were able to identify particular practices that were characterized as in groups that use those, and then particular goals in terms of increasing capabilities and social inclusion that these different organizations used in the work. The final thing I want to talk about is this study we're involved in right now. As I mentioned, we've been following some European work that uses this sort of 8-fold, actually it's 9-fold, it started as 8, but it's now 9-fold dimension, and said that what is social inclusion? What is a way of thinking about kind of people's access to the resources they need to lead a decent life? So we thought about these 8 or 9 dimensions, and over the past, just this past semester, we've been running a seminar with some graduate and undergraduates. Oh, I blew it. I don't know how to get it back. Anyway, I can tell you about it. Essentially, so the students have been going out, finding data sets to, how do we measure kind of the social well-being around education? How do we look at personal insecurity, and what kind of measures would we use? So we've been driving them crazy, I will say, because we've come in with these lofty ideas of social well-being, and they just want to know how to finish the semester and get a grade. So, you can see how it's going to set up to cause problems. But one thing that's emerging from that is, first of all, that the arts are very strongly connected to other measures of what we call social connection, which we're getting from the presence of groups in neighborhoods, and from subjective measures that we're able to get from a survey around people's feeling of connection in the neighborhood. And really what we're picking up, which we expected, so we're happy we're picking it up, is that there really that there isn't just one map of Philadelphia that is the map of poverty, or the map of income, or the map of HIV infection, that there are multiple maps that show different measures of social inclusion, and that the arts map is indeed different from the map of kind of standard economic well-being. So as I said, the hope here is that we're able to use this research, first of all, to lay out a notion of where the gaps in terms of social well-being are in the city. But I'm hoping we'll be able to move beyond this, because I really think there's been an undervaluing of the role the arts can play in terms of promoting other forms of social well-being. And the idea of this particular exercise is, in fact, to use the arts to kind of build out from the arts, to talk to other other relevant actors in communities and get them engaged. So thank you.
So I want to start off by saying that Gerald Ross and I have been co-teaching this first-year practicum project, and all through the last semester and a half, we've been saying to our students, Oftentimes, presenting this project in front of an audience is challenging for them. It's difficult to sort of enumerate all of the moving parts, and we've talked about that, and then Gerald and I had to put together a presentation, and we said, maybe it's challenging because it actually is challenging. So this is going to move at a fair clip. There's a lot of content. Forgive us if occasionally we're simply reading off of slides, which I realize is terrible PowerPoint etiquette, but we are off and away. As I said, Curatorial Practice, M.F.A, it's a new program. It's the inaugural year. Gerald and I have the distinct honor of teaching the inaugural class, and this is the inaugural practicum project, or as I call it, the practicum challenge. What is that? Well, students entering Mica's Curatorial Practice M.F.A all accept the challenge that they will have to create and install a major collaborative exhibit that directly addresses the diverse communities living in Baltimore's Station North Arts and Entertainment District. So what kind of show this is, what kinds of artists they pick, or what kind of practices those artists pursue, the actual physical venue, the theme, that was all up in the air. The only thing that was a given is this must be, the visioning process must include the residents of Station North, and this show must address and invite them directly. Why this project? Well, first, there's a simple matter of geography. Curatorial Practice is sited in Station North. We're in the studio center on North Avenue. Station North is our backyard. So we are trying to create an ongoing, sustained relationship between the program and its home, and an expectation that there will be a dialogue that is ongoing. There's this issue of the people. I think I can say that Curatorial Practice emphasis is on audiences, on outreach, research, engagement, advocacy, on maximizing an exhibit while it's up, not merely patting yourself on the back once the opening has occurred, but continually finding all of these opportunities to invest and bring people in and raise consciousness. And finally, there's just the logic of the program and the way it's designed. Practicum is a group project that the entire class executes for a predetermined space by the end of their first year. Meanwhile, the actual thesis projects are solo projects that take 2 years and can happen anywhere in Baltimore. So there's this idea that it's geographically constrained, you have the support of your classmates, it's a midpoint project. So for all those three reasons, that's why we do what we do. To help our students, because for the most part, Baltimore is new to them, and they really have to hit the ground running to be able to meet people, determine what can be done and who needs to come into the conversation in a hurry, we needed to assemble a practicum advisory committee. Also to help address politics, to avoid duplication of previous projects or things that are ongoing. This 12-member committee includes George Sissel, who is the director of the program, and my boss, the practicum teachers, Gerald and myself, members of the Baltimore arts community. This includes artists, educators, people working in museums, and then finally residents of Station North, community leaders, people whose lives and livelihoods are tied to this area and its development. So how did we do this? Well, the first semester was our research phase. This began with a flurry of, as my students would say, entirely too many walking tours. You can see up there in the upper right, that's Garland Thomas, who I believe is the deputy director for the Central Baltimore Partnership. He's on our advisory committee. So we've had all of those tours. You see Stuart Watson in the bottom right, Area 405. Also on our committee, has been in Station North since before it was an arts district. This began with group excursions, moved on to as the students began to define their individual research interests. They began to pursue them, making contacts, building relationships with organizations and individuals, and pursuing individual proposals. Each member of the class, everyone's laughing about this. This is a moment after a marathon presentation where Catherine, one of the students, asked everyone to stand up and stretch, which this presentation is not long enough for us to need to stretch. So each student had to create their own detailed individual proposal where they outlined their themes, specific audience data, possible exhibition partners within Station North, people to support the show, people to house it, public programming concepts, and then specific budget estimates. It was a very forward-looking, I would say almost visionary set of proposals they came up with, including everything from projects involving food trucks to projects involving citizen media and transforming an art gallery into basically a TV studio, to even sort of traditional oral history projects involving the Baltimore riots of '68, for which, of course, Station North and North Avenue was so much a fault line. Those 10 individual, fully realized proposals became one. The students reached a consensus on a distilled single proposal. If you know George Sissel, you know that he does not believe in voting, he believes in consensus. But of course, consensus does not merely mean a unanimous vote. It means every voice is heard, every view is taken into account, and we all find a way to move forward together. And that is what the students did. They united around one project, the anniversary list, which will open this fall, and I will let Gerald tell you about the nuts and bolts of that.
It does kind of come down to nuts and bolts at this time, this point. And the first thing I did in my first class was say, let's take a vote on that. And everybody's like, okay, it's definitely the wrong thing to do. Basically, they've come through this realization collaboratively, and their project is a collaborative one. So it's all about collaboration. The students are pairing up 10 SNAID businesses, shops, cafes, and other vendors in the past have not been stakeholders in the Station North mission, with 10 artists that are based in Baltimore, the Mid-Atlantic region, and beyond. They're calling it the anniversary list. Participating businesses range from long-established residents to newly opened ventures, some of them 30 years old, some just open a year. A wide variety of businesses, florists, barbershops, restaurants, carry-out places. Artists signed on to the project, the 3 of them here. New York City textile artist, Colombian-born DC multidisciplinary performance artist, and a Baltimore-based artist. Businesses, again, this is a collaboration, will work directly with the artists, creating 10 temporary site-specific art installations, a wide variety of media. What it comes down to is the scope of each project will be discussed and decided jointly by them and the artists. Of course, the students are also heavily engaged in this, putting them together, creating a dialogue, letting each understand the various parameters that they're working with. This is where it comes down to the traditional list. This is where the artist comes in with a material based on the business's anniversary within the cultural district. So for example, if a florist is there 5 years, they might use that, that would be, what is 5 years? Wood, for example. The wood is basically the theme. It doesn't have to be the material. It can be the concept. 20 might be, can you read that? I can't read it. 20 is China. It's so small here. So you get the idea that an artist comes in and has the opportunity to use that material in some sort of context within that business to generate an art piece. Together, the 10 installations serve as an unconventional celebration of SNAID's 10th anniversary. So it's in a larger umbrella. We're also celebrating, in a big sense of the word, not only the businesses, but the cultural district. Each installation highlights the business's history and hopefully spurs a dialogue between arts and non-arts audiences. I can't emphasize that enough. The students chose businesses that specifically were not part of, I guess, Station North's larger benefits group. Celebration Station is what we call the hub installation. Logically, this is going to be here at Mica, and the hub serves as a center outreaching to each of these different installations across SNAID. This is some of the programming: performance tours, walking tour, dance tours, bike tours. For the hub space opening, we're hoping to have Graham Creel Allen here as a docent. A catalog, newsprint, other materials that is really hands-on. People understand it. It's very cheap, sort of mass manufacturing. Postcards, interactive businesses, business cards, artist cards, and a takeaway inside for promotions. Here are the desired outcomes that Jeffrey's going to take over.
Yeah. So ultimately, the 1 minute. Okay. The goal of this is to expand access to and involvement with visual and performing arts in Station North, bring more voices into a conversation about the future of Station North and what arts and development should or can do for the community. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. The businesses that were selected, the students went out into the community. They distributed written surveys. They had the businesses fill out, and then in conversation one-on-one and in retrieving these, they determined that many of these businesses either were skeptical of the mission of Station North, were only tangentially related to it, or did not even know that they were in an arts district. So clearly, bringing them on board into an expanded conversation about what is the future of this place, it's a goal of the project. It's something that we all want. And finally, to increase empathy, engagement, and a sense of history within this neighborhood, or these neighborhoods gathered together. What's this mean for the future of practicum? Each year there will be a new practicum class, which may raise a question for some about what does this mean for sustainability. The students may change though, but the assignment remains the same. Every year, Station North is the project. So each class will build on the knowledge base, the relationships, and the results of the previous year. We're here to stay. And that's our program. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. I am very excited to be here with colleagues and friends. And I want to share with you some of the research that has been going on underneath the umbrella of the Masters of Arts in Community Arts and under the umbrella of the Office of Community Engagement around the outcomes of community art on the individual. So this work comes out of being an executive director of a nonprofit community arts organization for the last 15 years. And while I have seen many beautiful things happen, it has been with few resources. And so I've been really interested in thinking about how, and this is a photograph of programming where young people are in charge of the classroom. And as our program evolved, we were seeing anecdotally these amazing things happening. But we were not able to grow in a way that allowed expansion of the ideas or deepening of the ideas beyond sort of this little nook that we'd created in Reservoir Hill. So the struggle that we identified is that there's a lack of understanding of art's unique impact. And what this means is that funders don't invest in significant ways, though funders often love the arts. To really invest in arts as a strategy doesn't often happen. And programs end up using measures that don't quite fit. So lots of art programs are asked to think about how they impact grades. And while that is an important thing to improve, it can be a stretch. But that's not to say that there aren't outcomes that affect school. So I felt like we needed to dig a little deeper to think about how we tell the story of this work to improve the sustainability of programs that at least anecdotally and intuitively seemed effective. So how to do this? So the place that we started was looking at practitioners and asking practitioners. You can't measure something if you don't know what it is. So, and I think that there's some sort of, we try to avoid defining what community art is sometimes. So we decided to go ahead and ask practitioners who'd been in the field for 10 to 30 years, how do you define it? What is it? How do you do it, and what comes from the work? What are the outcomes that you see? So today I'll talk mostly about the outcomes, not the definitions, but this is a crew of people that were interviewed, and this work was done with Zoe Resnick-Gawanter, who's on camera in the back, and a number of grad students who are also in the room. So these folks were interviewed, and Zoe transcribed all of the data, and we then categorized and coded it all. So, and we're now building on this, and you'll see this as the presentation goes on. We're building upon the findings from this study and asking young people what they get out of it. So the findings, this gives you a sense of how the practitioners answered the things that they thought were important, and take special note of the top 4. And the prevalence of those top 4 outcomes. And we'll go into these a little bit more in depth. So the first one, emotional shift. So this was sort of looked like, I like my arts program, I have fun there. And practitioners didn't notice this one as much as actually young people have noticed this one, but this is the first thing that young people say is, it's fun. But this idea of joy, this idea of feeling of inspiration, that there's an aha that you get, a sense of possibility, these are sort of temporary emotional states that a young person might experience when they go to a community arts program. Why does this matter? In Baltimore City schools, according to the climate survey of 2010, 63% of students consider fighting to be a problem. 59% of students feel that classroom disruptions interfere with learning at their school. How would that make you feel? Not so good. So as a result, we have about a 50% dropout rate, not just in Baltimore, but in lots of other major cities. So feelings, it would appear, do impact the way people behave. We can see from a little bit of the preliminary data from looking at how young people are experiencing their community arts programs that the way that they feel about their neighborhoods in comparison to the way that they feel about their programs is pretty different. So that white figure there is, wow, I'm really happy to be at my arts program, and you can see in their neighborhoods there's kind of a little range. So the one side, I don't know if you can read that, says very happy, the other side is not so good. So I want to give you a chance to hear directly from young people.
It's a lot of fun here because we get to do art and stuff and learn about art.
A lot of times when I come here, all the bad things that happen to me in school, they get off my mind because I have so much fun stuff to do here.
And it was very interesting and exciting and engaging.
These are just these little tiny snippets I'm going to give you that show that young people are agreeing. And you can see with the younger kids, it's fun. With the older kids, it's engagement. So that's just the language that they use. The next outcome is sense of self. So we're seeing that young people are reporting, as well as adults are reporting, that people are walking away with confidence, self-awareness, affirmed strengths, and identity. So the way that I think about this outcome is that it's not just I have fun when I'm here, but I actually understand something good about myself as a result of that fun. So where I think of the first outcome is sort of temporary, this is a little bit more sustained. So how does community arts do this? The artistic process in a community arts program is often about expressing what you know and who you are. It's inherently asset-based. So you're starting with your strengths and working from there. Whenever you put a mark on a piece of paper, you're working with what you've got and celebrating that. And the themes that are explored, oftentimes what distinguishes a community art setting from an art education setting is the theme that is chosen. So choosing a theme that has personal relevance also echoes that celebration of who I am. And the process often involves reflecting on your own work. So you put it out there, other people look at it, they tell you things about it, they tell you it's great. So why does this matter? Well, we think when we read other folks like Van Dora that self-efficacy, or this belief in yourself, translates to one's behavior. So whereas schools are sort of working in a maybe possibly negative way, many of them, art is building towards positive behaviors.
I learned that I'm a lot more talented than I thought I was.
Help me draw and be able to accomplish more things than I thought I could ever do.
Before I started this program, I was a really shy person. I didn't really like talking much. That held me back from a lot of things, you know, not saying what was on my mind and stuff like that. After sharing my personal story that I made last year, it made me a little bit more comfortable in, you know, being myself.
Because normally in school, I'm usually quiet and shy, but not here. I'm like very open and sociable. So I think it's helped me, I guess, open up.
It shows us how to be creative and not to be basically scared to do things, to show our talents and things like that.
Those are pretty young kids and older kids really talking about, I think, really echoing what adults think is happening. So increased sense of community. So this is a really significant outcome that I think echoes some of the things that Mark was talking about, and certainly the work of the Station North. How do you create this on a community level, the sense of connectivity? But we're seeing that this is happening on the individual level as well, that young people are gaining a sense of connection. So how does art do this? The artistic process is often collaborative, so young people report working in teams. They're often about identity and how to make a community issue better. And it also involves looking at other artists and sort of understanding new ideas and new perspectives. So why does this matter? I'm going to skip that. There's some research out there that would help you with that, but I want to have a chance to see the video.
I learned more about my friends.
And then we acted as a family, like we supported each other from each other's stories. I'm like, oh, that's sad, you know. Nobody wasn't beating nobody down. School was different. Somebody would try to get smart with them and stuff, be playing and stuff too much when it's something serious.
Now when it comes to like issues, like, because most of our videos are about issues in Baltimore, I'm like more interactive with it, more engaged, like more interested. Like before it was just like, oh well, but now I'm like, probably like, you know, starting to care a little bit more.
We talked about this one topic about refugees, and I always knew that refugees didn't really feel welcome, most of them at least. And I learned that the way that I speak to them or what I say, or even little things I might do that I shouldn't really be doing because they feel out of place here, so I should make them feel more welcome.
You're seeing that young people are really getting a sense of, I need to be more kind to others. So you start from this sense of connected to your peer group, and then it fans out to the greater community. The last outcome that I'll really address is empowerment, and the idea that you can make good choices and carry on the work. Creating a vision of what you wish to see or practice, a positive outcome makes doing more possible. And so this video, there is a young person that was actually, in an 8-week class, they did a piece about peer pressure. And this young man, I think, speaks in a pretty compelling way about how that 8-week experience helped him make a different decision.
I am more inclined to create like what I envision and like complete it and share it with other people.
We recorded a video about peer pressure.
I have witnessed somebody get peer pressure, but I just really never said anything. And like this class told me like peer pressure is not good, especially like bad way. Maybe I should say something, or maybe react to it.
I get peer pressured a lot, and that kind of helped me because after that I got peer pressured into doing something actually, and that kind of helped me out a little bit. One of my friends wanted me to do something, and I said I didn't want to do it, and he kind of got mad and said he didn't want to be my friend no more. And I was really going to do it, but I thought about it and I didn't do it. I think if I didn't do this class, I don't think I would be here right now. Not like gone. I think I'd be like in serious trouble right now. That really kind of helped me. I think that was like a gift to me, for real.
This idea that when you practice doing something positive, or you practice reflecting on positive behavior, that you actually then have more capacity to behave in positive ways. So the other outcomes that we won't go into, but from what we've found, this is sort of the trajectory. You start with I'm engaged, and there's an emotional shift. Then you understand a sense of self. I understand my strengths. And young people then move to a stage of I am connected, I have a sense of community. And then I make good choices. I feel empowered to really carry this vision into my choice making. And then that fans out into the final ring, which is I make a positive impact on my community. And throughout that process, it seems like skills are gained and creative problem solving is happening. So moving forward, I hope to do more research to continue to understand what's happening for young people so that we can build spaces that make sense for young people, that support them in ways that allow them to create the communities we would wish to see in Baltimore and beyond. Thanks.
So, Dr. Stern demonstrated how an investment in art can transform the economy of a city. Jeffrey and Gerald explained how they're using art to impact dialogues that communities are having about the use of art in non-traditional spaces. And Rebecca has shown you how art actually impacts individual people on an individual level. I would like to share with you the concept of using art as a tool for advocacy and justice. And our model for testing this initiative is a new project called the Baltimore Art Justice Project. And I really wanted to start with this quote because I think it makes sense. Anybody in here who's an artist feels this way sometimes, that art reminds you that you actually have a soul and can do something with it. So, art provides creative solutions to social problems. What you're seeing right there is, it comes in many different forms. This is a light that was created with a 2-liter soda bottle filled with water. Alfredo Moser, a Brazilian mechanic, came up with this idea that if you take 2-liter soda bottle, fill it with water, you can produce light for villagers who have no electricity and are living in the dark. To me, that is the ultimate idea of a creative solution to a structural social problem. Look what we can do with our water bottles over there. Let's do it tomorrow. So the Art Plus Justice Project is sort of a citywide approach to thinking about this idea. This is a row of houses in East Baltimore near Mica Place. We've seen it all before: vacant housing, litter, cracked pavement, desolation. Baltimore has serious structural challenges due to poverty, racism, and classism that's created a serious geographic inequity across the city and contributed to a myriad of social structures, social problems, and barriers that we're trying to overcome. So in case you didn't realize, you're sitting in an art school, despite my horribleness with the Prezi. And since we're in an art school, our thoughts is that we're going to take an artistic approach to thinking about these structural challenges and barriers. Our stab at this is the Baltimore Art Plus Justice Project. You're going to probably hear it many different ways over the next 2 years: social mapping, mapping social justice project, but it is the A plus J project. So just think about that. You hear it, A plus J, you got it. Okay. So we're working under this theory of change that we will have a better, more just Baltimore, okay? If we identify, strengthen, and support a collaboration between the art community and the advocacy community, our allies in social justice. So these are the problems that we've sort of identified. A lack of resources. Some artists and designers receive a majority of the dollars in Baltimore, and some artists are obscure and we don't know where they are. They do not receive these resources. There are barriers that are set up in funding initiatives where artists are not encouraged to work together and pool their resources. We don't even know what's happening in our own backyards. We're very siloed, we're very separate. We also believe that we have a very real inability to see art as a viable tool for justice. You can have a community theater artist who's been working with a prison population who receives a $5,000 grant. And then you have an advocacy organization that's working with the prison population, they receive $50,000. We think that the art project is just as significant for change as the advocacy project. And what we want to do is create opportunities for us to start shifting the dialogue to really see art as a viable tool that deserves that kind of resource as well. And then also, there's a lack of synergy among artists and allies in justice. Like, there's no shared language between artists and advocates so that they can work together, or artists and communities so that they understand what the other half is doing. And we're wanting to find ways to address that. So I'll sort of show you how. Our solution is that we have a couple of different components of the project. Artist profiles. So what we want to do is we're partnering with Animating Democracy. They're creating a tool where we're going to create an artist profile for Baltimore City. Artists and designers, arts projects, and arts organizations, so that we can have a full, clear picture of what we're calling, Mark, you might call it cultural assets. We're kind of calling it cultural vibrancy. Vibrance. Think SpongeBob, imagination. So we want to capture the vibrancy of Baltimore across geographic and economic lines. We want every artist and designer to be a part of building an artist profile for the city. Not just the folks who we're used to seeing, but the mom and pops who have not been on the map before. Okay? Let's see. The way we're going to do this is after we have the survey tool that's going to be collecting these artist profiles in this database, I'm going to do GIS mapping. So we're going to create a giant web portal that has a map on it. And on it, we will extract where artists are, and we'll take this information and start overlaying data. So that if you're in 21217, you can put in 21217, and you'll see every single artist and arts project and arts organization that is in that area. If you're interested in homelessness, you can put in homelessness, and you will see which artists across the cities are working on homelessness. Okay? And then we're going to take this information, we're going to layer this data. So we're going to put in demographic data about Baltimore City so that artists actually understand the communities that they're trying to impact, and so that artists will be able to say, hey, I do these murals over here on the east side, you do these guys over on the west side, why don't we see if we can make a connection with one another? And then we're going to make advocacy information readily available so that artists will be able to say, this is the advocacy organization I should be working with on this particular structural issue. Once the data is captured, I just described that, we're also going to have a series throughout the next 2 years of community dialogues. We would like to get artists and advocates and funders together to sit around the table, and communities that are being impacted by art, to talk about what the structural challenges are, what programs need to be created, what procedural things need to change so that we have a stronger collaboration between artists and advocacy organizations. In a perfect world, there will be an artist in residence in every city service in Baltimore City to come up with structural interventions to impact what's happening in the city. It will be really fun, and a lot of you guys will be employed. Wouldn't that be cute? All right. Also, storytelling is a large part of the project. We want to create opportunities for artists to make their case, to show why their work is a social justice strategy, why it's a tool for change, and for advocates to be able to do digital narratives and talk about how they really engaged with an artist to make it happen. They didn't just say, hey, build me a poster for my health communications program, but they did something that was deeper and stronger and more sustainable. And then our resource database, which feeds into the National Animating Democracy Landscaping Project. So no matter where an artist is on the map, their profile will be a part of this national resource database. So you can find these artists everywhere. So an artist in Baltimore can go into the resource database that they're featured in, and also see if there's an artist in Michigan who's doing the same exact work. Bridging connections and community. All right, so who benefits? In our universe, the main beneficiaries are practitioners, artists, arts organizations, and art projects, partners, advocacy groups and nonprofits, and city service agencies and funders, that the funding community will actually be able to see this connection that's happening between art and justice and actually make something happen, and fund people accordingly, and shift the resources where they need to be. And our measure of success, resource sharing. We want, because artists will understand what the landscape of Baltimore is, what exactly is happening, the vibrancy, that artists would have an opportunity to share resources, to find ways that they have like common connections with one another, to, hey, I've got a theater curtain over here, and you guys need a theater curtain, you can borrow this. Like a place, a hub for artists to have a conversation with one another and be able to share and pool their resources together. Increased investment. If we have enough examples to show exactly how powerful art can be as a creative approach to structural problems, it is our thought that we could have more targeted investment from the funding community in the first place. But we need to show them how it works and how it happens and create the case for it. Coalition building. What we would like to see after this project is built is it would be lovely in the universe if we were able to have a coalition of artists and advocates who were working together to develop solutions to structural programs in a very concentrated, very strategic way for Baltimore City. And then partnership formation, that hopefully we will see partnerships across all three, practitioners, partners, and funders that'll continue and create a sustainable Baltimore. So that's kind of our lofty goal of the Art and Justice Project. You can ask me all kinds of questions. I probably won't be able to answer them, but thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your fabulous presentations. It's 11:45, and Rebecca, can we keep people for a good at least 10 minutes? Okay, we know some of the students have to move on to another segment after this, but I would love to open the floor to some questions. And you can just raise your hand if you have a burning question for any one of our panelists specifically or for the group as a whole. Mike, is that Melissa? Yeah. Melissa.
I think first we have to have the artists and the advocates sort of see what they can do creatively that keeps their funding and also funds the artist. Like, if they're creating solutions together, they'll come up with a creative solution to make sure that everyone gets paid. You know, that people aren't just stealing money or taking money from one particular pool to the other. But that means getting the artists and advocates in the same room together to develop that approach together, as opposed to, I'm doing a project over here and I want to do a project over here. They actually need to sort of build it. Yeah. You know? Yeah, exactly.
Other questions?
You know, the issue of the arts and gentrification is something that lights on a lot of people's minds. We've taken the approach that what we see is when the focus is on arts-based community development, that it tends not, in our experience, to be kind of a rapid process of kind of total displacement of one community by another. That what we tend to see, especially in our work in Philadelphia, is a gradual change in communities, which is a combination of both different people moving in and new assets available for the people who are there. You know, I think I get the sense in Baltimore that there's that this is on people's minds, and I honestly can't say that like I'm an expert on what's going on here.
Thank you. There was another hand. Mike?
My question is for Jeffrey and Gerald. When you guys were talking about the sort of like the advisory panel committee that you put together for the program, can you talk a little bit about the role that the advisory committee plays, and if after this sort of semester and a half, if you've seen that as a mutually beneficial thing for the students and the members of the panel?
Well, I mean, I would say the role of the committee, so they've met with the students, they're going to meet with the students a total of, I would say, 6 times. So a certain amount of it, I would start with the mutually beneficial one and say yes, absolutely. Because on the one hand, the students get to hear, get to be brought up to speed a lot faster on dynamics that are going on, the programs that have a history that maybe they don't know about, or that they're only sort of partially aware of. Red flags are raised as sort of programs are proposed. But then there's also a sense that all the folks on the committee are invested in the project. Everyone gets excited about the project at each meeting, and whatever criticisms they have, they also have a sense of this thing forming, the energy behind it, the intentions. So the hope is that they will all become also invested in its success and be cheerleaders for it. So it's definitely been mutually beneficial and also eye-opening. So I don't know if that answers.
Gerald, did you have any additions to that?
Only that I think it's such a wide group that they're getting advice from a lot of different people. They're getting people from museums and from people working in the community directly. So they might have some advice on programming that works and may not work, or bus tours or walking tours, or they might have something like, you really want to deal with this kind of approach to a business because this is the experience. So there's a lot of experience, and I hope that it's really rich in terms of getting that kind of feedback.
Everything from nuts and bolts troubleshooting of, this kind of program won't work to that might not be the best partner for you. So runs the gamut.
In the back, I can't see. Is that Deborah?
Hi, yes it is.
Wow. Hi.
Hi. These are 2 questions for Rebecca. Rebecca, I'm wondering if all of the kids that are interviewed were from one particular project, and I'm also wondering if you've been able to present that presentation to people at the Baltimore City Schools, for example. I mean, I feel like you make the perfect case for why art really needs to be back in the city schools and in every school, just because of the lessons that kids get from it.
Well, thank you. The presentation was finished yesterday at noon.
Okay.
To my husband. The young people that were represented were from multiple programs, and we're probably 2/3 of the way through with our interviews. So we've been reaching out to all programs that will have us to do focus groups or interviews with their young people. Okay. So I think there are about 5 or 6 programs that have been interviewed. Maybe more than that, but there were probably only about 4 that were actually represented in there. Because they were just the most articulate, but the findings are pretty similar.
Okay. Thank you.
I would love to talk to you more about
I
how
want to talk
we
about
these ideas to the school system.
Okay.
Yes.
My question's for Mark. Do you know the Love Letter to Philadelphia project?
Yes.
Are you okay? Did you do any research into public art and the role of murals as art as a tool for change?
Yeah, we a few years ago had the opportunity to work with the Mural Arts Program, the city's Mural Arts Program, around doing some data gathering and analysis and some just thinking about how you attract stuff. And it was really interesting because the Mural Arts Program has this community engagement model, and what we found was that when it operates, it actually is quite effective. The challenge for the program is that, in fact, it can only allow that model. It only fully uses that model in a certain percentage, a minority really, of the murals that actually build. So there's always been the tension in the Mural Arts Program between the depth of engagement and production. And I will say, speaking at an art school, that one of the real achievements of the Mural Arts Program that they don't trumpet enough is that they've turned being a muralist in Philadelphia into a real job. But in a sense, because they want to talk more about the community impact, I don't think they do that. But there is that tension in the program. In terms of the love letters, we didn't do anything specifically on that. I will say that I feel that, again, one of the tensions in a mural program is between kind of one's kind of regional profile and the depth of what one can do in a particular community. So I'm much more persuaded by murals where it's on some wall on a street corner where you've really pulled in the people in that neighborhood, rather than picking up just people writing the L in from Upper Darby. I feel like the first, in terms of depth of impact, is likely to have a bigger impact.
Yes, right here.
I have a question for Rebecca. I was wondering in your surveys how you took into consideration the quality of the arts program. I wanted you to speak about that and what your thoughts on that.
The purpose of the research so far has been to look at the successes of each program as a way of creating a map of when it works, this is what it looks like. And from that data, I anticipate that at some point we'll be able to have some kind of assessment that will allow programs and funders and folks to understand where folks are being successful and where not. Though when we go into places, we learn some things about different sites. That's not really the intent of the research right now. We're really just taking what the good stuff from each site. Does that answer the question?
Another question over here on the left.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I'm curious in terms of two things. Art economics, as you work in some of these communities, what are you doing, anybody's doing anything around art economics so that communities can figure out how to generate income from their art, particularly since of the high poverty rates. Secondly, I'm in public health. I'm from Morgan State School of Public Health, and I'm looking at how any of your work might be related to health outcomes or some of the other types of outcomes. I know it's kind of early phase of development and research, but I'm really curious to look at those two issues.
Is your question for Rebecca or anyone on the panel?
Anyone.
Okay. Jump right in, whoever wants to answer.
I can share. So I wasn't highlighting my own program in this presentation, but we have created an economic model where young people create videos for organizations that are like-minded and have a nonprofit social justice mission. And we have generated about half of our operating budget this year, which is a shock to all of us. But it is beginning to be an economic model. I think that there are models for how art is used in public health. I know people in public health talk a lot about the Photo Voice Project. So using art as a tool for research, for understanding how young people see their communities. I think much more could be done in terms of thinking about how art can re-envision a community. But I don't know that that is fully developed yet. But I think that all the things that we're talking about really set the stage for that kind of work to be done.
I would like to think, when I think for the Art Plus Justice Project, the layering of data is really important. So public health and health outcomes and the demographics of health related to the city, having that as a layer on the map, I think is really important. So that an artist who's working on teen pregnancy in a neighborhood is able to see that perhaps the issue that's impacting that neighborhood, the young people at that point, is asthma, not teen pregnancy. So that artists are working smarter on the issues, not just what your passions are, but the actual issues that are impacting the people in the communities that you're trying to serve. So that's one of our approaches to making sure that public health is a part of it.
What stage of development is your database? Will it be available anytime soon?
Yeah, actually we are going into beta testing of our survey tool within the next week. And we're on the trajectory of starting to create, having full artist participation by mid-May, early June.
I guess, we've gotten some indicators of public health. That social stress index I mentioned picks up on some issues of health around kids, and we're finding really strong connections between communities that have active cultural scenes and improvements in public health, controlling for socioeconomic status. Susan Seifert, my colleague, has been saying we've got to do more of that. The big challenge is, that for good reasons, people in public health are nervous about, making their data public. So we have to work to build relationships with folks to bring that data into our analysis.
I'm afraid I have to wrap